Okay, good afternoon. My name is Tony. I'll be chairing this session, which is the title of the session is Rio Plus 20, a landmark in the fight against eco-crisis or just a lot of hot air. So I'll be chairing this session, and we have three speakers here today with us. We have Neva Frecheville from WWF, Bart Dhondt from the Belgium Young Greens, and Harald Heubaum from just across the road at SOAS. So, the way we're going to do it is we'll probably, given that we're running a little bit late, we're looking at making an absolute finish to this by 5:45. I think that'll be fine. So I'm going to, that gives us just over, no, what's the time? Yeah, it just gives us just over an hour and a quarter. So I'm suggesting that we give each speaker roughly about 15 minutes. Is that okay? And then open that to the floor for contributions or questions. We'll be using this microphone because there's a lot of background noise. Okay, so I would like to call upon Bart, who is going to be our first speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I am Bart. I'm from Belgium. I am the president of the Young Greens in Belgium. But as you are probably aware of, Belgium is a quite complex country. So I'm the president of the Dutch-speaking Young Greens. We also have our Francophone friends. And I'm also member of the steering committee of the Global Young Greens. I was in, maybe some of you might know about it. End of March, beginning of April, there was a big congress in Dakar of the Global Greens. And the Global Young Greens were there as well, and they also held a conference where they elected a new steering committee. I will talk about that a little bit more later. What I was asked here to come and talk about was about political involvement, and I will just tell you about my experiences, and hopefully we can have a nice debate with all the other people in the panel. I will try. Yeah, saying it is already. I hope I can live up to it. I'll try to be short, so that there can be interaction with the public. I think that's also always interesting. So I'm Bart. I'm 20 years old, and 18 years ago, I think it was 18 years ago, I received a book of my uncle, and you can guess maybe the title of the book. It's quite obvious. It was Agenda 21. And for me, I wasn't really aware of it. When I started in politics, I wasn't really aware of it. But that book, for me, it meant a lot. It really, I was reading in the book, and it was written for young people. I was 10 years old. It was written for young people of 10 years old, so that they, and in the book it was said, you had listed all the problems of the world, really all the problems of the world, how to eradicate poverty, the cleaning up of the slums in I don't know which country, and every time it was, there was mentioned how much money we needed to solve the problems. And I was amazed. I was like, wow, you have this book, and if we just do this, all the problems of the world are solved. And I went to my mother, I said, like, Mom, this is amazing. I mean, how difficult can it be? We just have to put the money on the table, and then all the problems are solved. But why is nothing happening? And I think there, two things for me changed. It was, once, I started to get really interested in numbers, and later on I studied economics. And two, because of that book, I believed in the, I don't know the word in English, but the makeability of the world. That the world, we can make the world as we want it. The world is not fixed. If we think we can change it, we can change it. And it's, you know, some people do not believe in it, but there I believed in that change is possible. You just have to act. So that as a small lapsus for how Rio of '92 really had an effect on me as a small kid. And so if to get to the question of the session, is it Rio plus 20, will it be landmark or hot air? Now I think other people of this panel, or you maybe already have heard, know much more about the real issues that are on the table and what will be decided and what implication that will have. But what for me is important about this conference is that it can inspire people, and that should be the goal as well. You know, if we want to change, the way the economic system works, if we want to change the way we live, our consumer economy, if we want to change that, we have to inspire other people to act differently. And that's how I came into politics. You know, you have this feeling that we can. I mean, there are big problems. You know, climate change is one of them. But the depletion of resources is a really big problem, and also the population boom, especially in cities, these are problems that we should face, and we need a political power. I mean, political power. We need political involvement, political power, to make that change happen. And that's how I came into how I set the step to politics. Is that you need to be, if you want to change the direction in which you are driving, you need to be on the steering wheel. That's as simple as that. You can, if you stand on the sideline and scream that yes, things are going bad, and you should, in the plenary session, I was a bit shocked as well about the pessimistic and really negative image that many of the people there were talking about. If you want to change, we have to show that change is possible, and you have to do that by being in a situation, so in governments, in the majority, to make to show to the people what kind of change we mean if you want to change direction. So that, for me, it's actually a plea for the Greens all around the world to not sit on the sideline, but to go and do what you're saying. And you can only really change the direction where we are going in if you are in a position of power in which you can change the laws, you can change the system itself. So that's a bit my input. So Rio +20, Landmark or Hot Air. I just hope it inspires more people, and it inspires us to continue our work and get as much change as possible, and to win elections and to get a bigger green political movement running. That's my.
Could I just ask you, would it be possible just to give us an idea about how the political situation is in Belgium vis-à-vis the Greens?
Okay. Asking the question, to give you an example, what the difference can be of a government with Greens and without Greens. In Belgium, we have different governments. Yeah? I'll keep it on 4. It's more easy. Others say there are 9, but I'll just say there are 4. We have a federal government without Greens. We have 3 regional governments. The Flemish region, there are no Greens in it. The Brussels region, there is a majority with the Greens, and also the Wallonian region is a region with Greens. All of them are invited, of course, to go to Rio, and guess who is going to Rio? Which ministers of sustainability are going to Rio? You know, it's a rhetorical question. Only the governments which have Greens in the council are going to Rio. So the Minister of Sustainability on the federal level of Belgium, he's not going. The Ministry President of the Flemish region, he has sustainable development in his, how you say it, we call that portefeuille, wallet, competences. Yeah. He's not even going to Rio. I mean, if we want something to be decided there, I find it appalling that they don't take their responsibility, and they don't even, they're completely not interested, apparently. So change has to come from grassroots, of course, but also politically, where the decisions are made. It's really important that we are there as well. And so what can we do? Well, like we are going on the 20th, there will be a big action day. We, the Young Greens, will go to the cabinet of the Minister President And just if the Minister President doesn't want to go to Rio, we're going to bring Rio to the Minister President. That's a bit the idea. Voilà. And on the, so I explained now the situation, the political situation in Belgium. So 2 governments with Greens, 2 without.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, what I suggest is we'll hear all the speakers and then open it out to the floor. So if I now call on Neva to speak.
Okay, hi everyone, well done for staying this late. Your dedication is truly remarkable. So I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet and kind of, I think, make 5 or 6 main points. But first of all, whether Rio is just going to be hot air or transformation, neither. Like, I think we've grown past the point where we think we can change the world with one event. I think we tried that with Copenhagen and we saw the massive failure that it was politically. And I think we know that we're on a journey of transformation and it's an ongoing process, and there'll never be a day where we wake up and go, yes, the battle is won, we've changed the world. You keep on pushing at this stuff and it is slow and it's painful, but you keep on slugging away at it. In terms of like the UN system and Rio Plus 20, I'm going to talk quite strongly in defence of multilateralism. I think that the global challenges that we face, like climate change, biodiversity loss, resource scarcity, these can't be dealt with by national responses. And as resource scarcity increases, conflict over those resources will only increase, and we need stronger international institutions and stronger shared understanding between countries and between governments to deal with them. We also need to address the disparity that exists both between and within countries, and that's not going to happen unless we have a global overarching kind of institutional framework. I think one of the things that we're seeing at the moment is the difference between Rio 20 years ago. It was a much more kind of divided world. There were the kind of developed countries who really drove the agenda, and developing countries who kind of didn't have that much voice and input. We're seeing it's like a massively fragmented landscape politically at the moment. Like, as I think somebody mentioned earlier, none of the developed country heads of government are going. So Cameron's not going to be there, Obama's not going to be there. All the emerging economies globally who are kind of driving change and who are really going to be the big players, they're all there. They're the ones that are really leading the agenda at Rio, so they're the ones that are making the decision, potentially for the next 20 years. It's an interesting reflection of kind of who's interested in this agenda and how they're shaping it. I also want to say like a little bit about the wider political context. In 20 years ago, end of the Cold War, massive feeling of positivity, a lot of like the end of a long period of economic growth. We're now in the middle of a kind of very severe global recession. There's no kind of positive feeling towards multilateralism on the political level at the moment. It's kind of an important player. Secondly, I guess the thing is Rio has a lot to contribute politically and everything that happens on the sidelines, on the fringes, because it's actually a massive mobilisation moment for civil society. They've got the People's Summit that's happening concurrently, which is an alternative space for social movements and organisations and faith groups and young people and every kind of person interested in this from around the world to come together and really like share ideas and inspire each other. It's a massively important thing. But that does, I believe, need to be reflected by a kind of global level agreement. And you can't have one or the other. Both of us, like both of those different systems need to contribute to the change. At the moment, we've got a really low level of political will. And I think one of the things that we can see, we're in a university at the moment, but most of the people who are here, I would say, are not students. They're people who graduated a fair few years ago. So I think the level of political will is reflecting the lack of engagement from younger generations and society more broadly with these issues. It's just not seen as important. I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens if Rio Plus 20 and the UN and multilateralism fails. Because there is a lot of harsh critiquing of the way that the UN has failed to deliver like the goods that we want to see. No climate change deal, we haven't met the biodiversity loss targets, Rio, politically weak document. Who does it benefit if the UN fails? It does not benefit the aims that we hold, that we as a movement are trying to meet. It benefits countries and vested interests who want to exploit a really unsustainable, socially unjust capitalist model. So in fact, strengthening the institutions, helping them to work, more efficiently, more transparently, helps our cause. I remember the first time that I ever went to a UN conference, and the fact that Tuvalu could get up and shout at America and say, "You are killing us, like, you're putting us underwater. My population, my people, we're dying because of what you do." That's not going to happen in the G8. That's not going to happen in the G20 because Tuvalu won't have a voice. It does at the UN. These are massively important things. And it may not be reflected in the outcome document, but the fact that there is a space for that engagement and that dialogue to take place, like, I wish it could be more visibly seen by the world. And you actually can watch these now on the web. If anyone wants to stay up late at night and watch UN negotiations on the internet. Okay, the fourth thing that I want to say is Copenhagen was a failure politically. We didn't get the global legally binding deal that we all wanted and kind of hoped for, but it did create awareness, and it created language that is now kind of mainstream discourse that I don't think would have been there without that global moment for civil society to come together. I know that for the movement it was hard, and a lot of people kind of dropped out afterwards and kind of went, well, look, we're not getting this, we're not getting what we want, I'm going to look at a very different way of working, I'm going to look at a different way of creating change, perhaps on a much more local scale. But if we only have these this discourse taking place in kind of academia or think tanks or government, and it's not communicated to a much broader audience, we're never actually going to see that mobilization that we need to see, the political will that will actually kind of have legislated change globally. Yeah, and the fifth thing that I wanted to say is kind of carrying on that idea of discourse and language and idea sharing. A lot of people say, oh, you know, all this UN stuff, it's only rhetoric. Language and ideas, okay, so the language that we have that express ideas are how we shape and understand our world. I think the significance of this is really, really underrated. If we can't understand these things and communicate them to a broader audience and have them understood and debated, we're lost. We're never going to make progress at all. So having a space, a global moment where the kind of global conversation is moved on is hugely important. So there's a lot of hot air, but it's hot air that has value. I had an interesting comment from a colleague recently. He said, it's true that money makes the world go round, but gossip's what makes the money move. And if you don't have that space for the gossip and the communication and like the human connections that we still depend on, no matter how much kind of information technology we have, it's never going to make change. And the final thing that I wanted to say is, this is the first time I've engaged with Rio. I was too young the first time it came round. And one thing that I find really hard is this time round, everyone says, wow, you know, 20 years ago, it was so much better. 20 years ago, there was so much more opportunity. 20 years ago, people were so much more passionate and engaged than they are now. And it's a bit like, wow, it's like shooting us before we've even begun. There is like no opportunity for inspiration. It's everything that Bart was talking about. How do you expect people to engage with this if you open with, it's going to fail? It's like that comment earlier, Martin Luther King didn't say, I have a nightmare. You have to find a way of inspiring a new generation. I think the movement is failing to do this miserably by the fact that there are kind of, I don't know, 20 of us in this room. Like, we should be looking at a way of going, yeah, there are big problems, but there are great solutions. And that journey, that process of finding them together is going to make life wonderful. Like, come on board. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Thank you very much. Okay, and now I'd like to move on to Harald from SOAS.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Harald. I lecture energy and climate policy at SOAS, which is a bit of a new approach for SOAS, but I think quite necessary. We focus more on policy and regulatory change and look at the Global South to a greater extent and rising powers in the Global South. We have a degree of the same name, the MSc in Global Energy and Climate Policy. There's more information right around the corner down the hall where we have a stand if you're interested. I'm going to take a slightly more academic approach to this. I'm not a campaigner, I'm not a political activist. So I will try to put that in academic perspective. I'd like to just start out with a quick word on Copenhagen because I've heard quite a lot on that today. Ken Livingston, I think, on the last panel, said that it was all the US's fault. I beg to differ. Copenhagen was a failure because of primarily procedural errors made by the Danish presidency or the Danish chairs. What they did, with the best of intentions, was to try and be transparent about the agenda and what they wanted to achieve at Copenhagen. So they circulated the agenda early on, wanted to involve everyone. Of course, the result of that was that everyone quickly found fault, and they all knew what was going on, so they could all chip in and derail the process. And that wasn't just the United States, that was China and others just as well. The lesson from this is, unfortunately, that you cannot be very open about the agenda you have going into a meeting. Maybe you should be, but these conferences are potentially problematic the way they're set up, and perhaps not the only way forward. But I think that's a problem that not just Copenhagen had. That's something that we see, we did see that last year at Durban. We will see it again in Doha. We saw it in Bonn at the preparatory conference, which I attended just recently, an annual conference that prepares the COPs that happen at the end of the year. It's agenda fights, first and foremost. It's fights over agenda and definition of issues. It's not about the actual issues and the policies and the things that we ought to be doing. And that's a problem with the UN system as it is right now. Looking back at Rio, I think it's important, and we're discussing, whether the last 20 years have been lost years and it's all been hot air. It's important to keep in mind that global politics and world politics at the time, perhaps not more opportunity, as Neva just said, but it seemed at least a little easier and a little more straightforward, and I will say why. 3 reasons, really. First, countries in the global south had not, especially the basic countries, had not fully emerged at that point in time, at the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, certainly not emerged as major challengers to the OECD world, economically speaking. So there was a big imbalance, and the OECD world and the United States and the European Union much, much stronger and much more willing to grant a few concessions to what they perceived to be relatively weak players still at the time. The second, the G77, which is this group of developing countries. You have the OSIS states as part of that group, the small island states, the least developed countries, the OPEC countries, developing countries, China, India, everyone's part of that group. That was largely unified at Rio, pushing the same agenda, pushing an equity and fairness agenda together. And looking back, I guess we would have to say, and here's where I would differ with Neva, that they were surprisingly effective in 1992 at Rio, given the power asymmetry of the early 1990s. Developing countries did have major input in Rio because they stood together, and because, I would argue, the global north didn't quite realize what the implications of agreeing on a sustainability agenda and climate change and biodiversity would actually mean in the longer run. So that's quite surprising that we had the result we had in Rio. The third point is that climate change was not as big an issue in the early 1990s as it is today. So it was a major issue, a major concern, yes, but it was handled and dealt with by a comparatively small group compared to today. There was industry opposition, there was support for it, yes, but it did not in the early 1990s elicit the same kind of response and reaction in a negative and positive way that it does today. And it was easier to agree on the UNFCCC as one of the major outcomes of Rio, which began that whole process that then, the first culmination was the Kyoto Protocol, and then Copenhagen, all these other things. So you could say that in those years it was easier for the global north to agree a bargain, even if the US and others perhaps didn't quite see where this would go. And today the world is very, very different. Okay, if you've read Ian Bremmer's latest book on winners and losers in the G0 world, he calls this world G0 as opposed to G20 or G2 or G8, because there's a lack of global leadership, then you will know that, you follow that argument, that the South is rising or has risen. China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey. There's a lot of players now that want a seat at the table. And not only are they rivaling the North, they've also adopted patterns of production and consumption that are very similar to those that we practice. And that's a challenge for resource use, energy, climate change, water, food. The second, and that's the first one, the first issue that I spoke of earlier. The second issue, the G77, very divided today, not united. And the division was very much the AOSIS states, the small island countries, and the least developed countries that are pushing for action on climate change, that are pushing for a better global deal, as opposed to OPEC, who are opposing that. And the worst culprits, if you will, in international climate negotiations is not the United States, it's Saudi Arabia and the oil-producing countries who have been pushing a particular agenda, and they chaired negotiations in Bonn. You know, the chair rotates, and whoever has the power to chair can either have a positive impact and try and set the terms of the debate, or you can go back to agendas that you've had 10 or 5 years ago and just halt progress, right? And so there are these deep divisions, and the G77 is not united on these issues and cannot push and speak with one voice the way they did or tried to do in Rio 20 years ago. And the third is climate change is very much top of the agenda. And there's a lot of debate between Global North, Global South, and within countries and country delegations over how best to deal with climate change. And climate change has an impact on pretty much every other major issue we're debating today, in poverty and development and energy, resources, food, water. I mentioned some of these earlier. And so today it is much more difficult to get the same sort of deal in Rio, or a better deal even, as opposed to 20 years ago. And that's why I think it is important that we move to other fora as well, that we look at lower levels of political authority, that we're looking at bottom-up processes, not top-down. 70,000 people in Rio and nothing will get done. Nothing much. That's just the truth. I mean, you talk to a lot of these think tanks and NGOs and companies and government delegations that are planning to go there. Of course, you show presence, but the actual real result of Rio, that's something else altogether. I would agree with Neva, what can Rio actually do, or what's it good for, in terms of having a global conversation and setting the terms of the debate, Rio matters. Because whenever you have a major event like this, 20 years on, you get a lot of media attention. And media attention means an issue can be kept on top of agendas, not just media agendas, but political agendas, public agendas. It will not disappear. We'll keep talking about it. You can use it as a platform to push a particular frame and a particular way of thinking about the problems that we're faced with. For example, that green growth agenda. And finally, it would also provide a platform to NGOs and countries and businesses and others to interact and exchange best practice. And you know, they do that in a number of fora. Rio is just one of them. But Rio is good for that as well. So there are a number of really good things that Rio can do. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to be any actual policy breakthrough, any major legally binding agreement. That's That's very, very unlikely. Certainly not one that will then also get implemented by individual countries. I mean, this is a party-driven process. Countries have to implement what they agree on at the international stage. But for that agenda-setting impact and keeping attention around the issues that we need to focus on, I think Rio is good. But I'll end here, and we'll leave it for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I think some very interesting and clear points came out of that. Those contributions. I think one of them, just sort of looking at one thing that Neva said, was about language, and that you know, often people see that language isn't very important, but you know, this is Rio, and I think this has also been talked about by Harald. I think Rio is an opportunity for that, and I think that if people think that language is not important, I think it's worth looking back to see what happens when a repressive regime first takes over, the sort of Chile scenarios or something like that. One of the first victims is language, and so we should never underestimate the power that language has. And even if we think we might be not making a lot of progress when we use language, when repression sets in, that's one of the first things that gets attacked. And I think also from what Harald and Bart said, it sort of echoes in a little sense the contribution made this morning at the plenary by those people who were there, by George Barder from the Occupy movement. You know, he mentioned something where you've got this massive, I think he gave the figure of $2,000 billion being spent on advertising, on putting a message. So in that sense, if all it does is gives a platform to people saying something different, then that has to be something, that has to be a forum worth engaging with. But enough from me, and I will hand over to the floor. What I would suggest is, because of the acoustics in here, I don't know whether people want to come up and use the mic.
I think that raises an important question. The thing that lies behind it, the mention of the media, is very important. Most people don't realise just how much our media is controlled and manipulated by the 1%. I expect most of you know what I mean by that. In case any don't, it's something that the Occupy movement has publicised, the fact that we are controlled by a super wealthy minority who are, I would say, in fact, psychopaths. They are driving us to destruction, and the source of their power is money, and the source of the money power is in fact the way our present money supply is created by banks when they make loans. Over 97% of our money today is made by banks making loans to individuals, to firms, to governments, and we are all collectively, in effect, paying interest on the existence of our money supply, and that is being funneled up to that 0.01%, in fact, right at the top, and they are controlling, by their money power, the politicians, the education of economists, and the media. A glaring point of the media control lately is what we hear about Syria. Global Research, a group in Canada led by Michel Chassidowski, has highlighted that, in fact, the problems in Syria are generated by the opposition people who are funded by the CIA and America and Mossad from Israel. They are the ones who have been creating all the murders, and the media over here are blaming Assad. They are blatantly lying, and they are building up to justify a war, just as they justified a war on Libya and on Iraq and so on with lies. And
can we bring the point back to Rio? The point you want to make about Rio?
the point about Rio is that the fundamental problem in the world is this money power, and all the problems develop from that. And I would like to give the speakers a few samples explaining that in a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things, by the way, my name's Anthony. I do social media awareness training, and I used to work for the civil service once as a climate change policy advisor, funnily enough. One of the things I've noticed in the various workshops I've been in is a lot of people have been carrying with them notepads, pens and paper. Yesterday I was at a conference at the European Parliament's London offices, and everyone had lots of little gadgets with them. But both have been saying the same thing. They both said, or comments from people have both said, that both their movements, whether it's think tanks or whether it's the climate change campaign, have been struggling to reach out to audiences beyond their bubble. Now, we're in London, which is one of the most diverse cities, if not in the country, then in the world. Now, look around at the audience that we've got. Now, this is not a personal criticism of any individual or necessarily of the organisers, but are we a reflection of the city that we are based in? Are we a reflection of the country? So what I'm saying is, with social media, there is a huge opportunity there for us, but we've got to be able to use it well to engage with people. A number of people have said, for example, this is our agenda, this is our message, we need to get it out there. But the thing is with social media is social media bites back. So if your message has got flaws in it, or if there are things that people have issues with, you've got to be prepared for people to come back at you with them. If all you're doing is broadcast, people will switch off and ignore you. So really, in terms of the movement moving forward, can the movement A, embrace social media, and B, embrace it in a manner that can allow you to go far beyond the activist bubble that, unfortunately, stereotypically, this part of London with ULU Students' Union traditionally has been in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I comment?
I think it's a really good point, and I think it's something that we all do definitely struggle with. And I mean, it is fascinating the way in which social media has changed the way in which the UN works. You can follow people who are inside the rooms negotiating, and you can learn what's happening on Twitter before it comes out in any other form. And it's an undiluted, uncorrupted form. I mean, it's subjective depending on whose position or who you're following, but you just see what's happening as it develops. You don't have to go through any controlled media source. I mean, a little bit about the UN is really trying to encourage this. They're really trying to open it up and make it more transparent. They can't do this at every level, but the agenda, the document that they're negotiating for Rio+20, anyone could submit to it. It was entirely open, so governments, civil society, individuals could input into it. How many of us actually chose to? Probably not that many, globally speaking. How many knew that we could do that? Pretty few as well. But the problem has then become, to a certain level, you crowdsource information, you get global opinion, but how do you dilute, how do you manage that volume of information in any way that's kind of constructive that we can then move forwards on?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, interesting point by Neva, but I think you also were referring to us as a movement, the Greens as a movement, no? Like that we should communicate more and get our message across, not just what's happening on UN level?
I'm not just thinking the Green Party or the...
No, the movement as in, ecological movement, And I think what is really important and what I noticed today is and was Neva talked about it already, is the language we use. The language is ideology. You know, the words you use is the ideology you defend or you create. You know, so the words you use are very important. And I was quite you say that worried when I was hearing. I already told you. The way that some people that are here in the movement here, talking about the problems we face, I mean, the challenges we face, and the words they use to convey the message. I'm sorry, but I'm glad that they don't use Twitter and they're not on Facebook and everything, because I don't want these messages across, because you will not convince more people than the small activist pool that we are here. I'm sorry, that's from my experience. We in Belgium and also other green movements or green political parties, the way we communicate is really important. I mean, it's and the word. I mean, we communicate on a very different way, and we try to break out of this the small activist pool and the greens. You know, we need to broaden. Broaden the movement to reach more people, and that's I completely agree. But I was worried when I was hearing the speeches of the different people that the language we use now is not the language we have to use to convince more people.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I don't really know what's happening in the world. 20,000 rail workers are almost certainly going to lose their jobs. I'm absolutely certain there is no rail worker here. I'm absolutely certain that there's no one for any of the unions. This card I've got is produced by the TSSA, which is the kind of clerical section, ASREF, that's the drivers, RMT, that's the general one, Unite, that's bus drivers, TUC. I've brought up 100 cards. There is a real communication problem, that the people won't be here, that this organisation hasn't got them in the agenda anyway. You look right through the speeches, you will see nothing by any of these unions either. So lots of we have as you say, a real big problem. I live in Bristol, and we've had 2 talks on transport, which thank goodness Ken Livingston thinks is important, and so do I. And one of them is kind of fairly not aware of the kind of fact that all the transports run for profit, and really we don't come into it. Shareholders are all that matters. But the other meeting we had was drawn by the unions, and we as passengers didn't come into that either. They didn't ask, the passengers. And we are a campaigning group, and here's my little campaigning leaflet. So we have got real problems with communication, and I'm sure I've caused problems by announcing that none of the railway unions are taking part in a climate change conference.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, with the right. Just one point for the next contribution that Neva, you made, that the UN in relation to Rio are doing quite a lot online. And in fact, there's a number of sort of online votes where you can vote for your priorities on the various agenda things. So it is definitely worth looking at. Now, I'm not sure. I mean, I've certainly voted, but I have no idea what impact that will have, how that's going to be recorded, or whether it's going to have any influence at all. However, to say that there is that sort of level, and there's sort of constant updates through Twitter and various things like that. But
just to come back on a few of the previous the previous contributions, I don't think the climate movement should self-flagellate too much. I mean, I use a notepad, but Campaign Against Climate Change is on Twitter. It did send a delegation to the TSSA conference as a dedicated group reaching out to unions, and I think there's a lot of work to be done, but we do, and there is an absolute nightmare scenario as well with climate change. Like, it's right that there's a lot of doom and gloom, but we should take on a lot of the potential and the possibilities that the current situation offers, because the reason there's been no or very little effective action on climate change for 20 years is because of the power that's vested in large corporations, in governments that don't want to move. And actually that ruling class of people are terrified of us at the moment. Their system is in crisis, and wherever you look in the world, there are mass movements, there are revolutions, there are, I mean, you know, talking about public transport, in London next week, there is going to be the first all-London bus drivers strike in about, I think, 30 years. And you know, I think it's worth reiterating something that John McDonnell said in the plenary earlier, that there's debates to be had in the on the picket lines, in the demonstrations, and that's somewhere where we have to focus the climate message, and that's where some of the debates today have been quite useful, I think, because you know, when you talk to people about climate change now, I think people often worry that action on climate change will make them poorer. You know, that it will send their energy bills up, or that it will cost jobs in the power sector. And I think that doesn't have to be the case. And, you know, we can demonstrate how, you know, refocusing energy subsidies away from fossil fuels and towards renewables can reduce energy bills and solve fuel poverty, how investing in infrastructure for renewables and public transport can create jobs. And I think actually in this time where capitalism's in massive crisis, where you have protest movements going up left, right and centre, we have huge potential to take that message out and to win something that can terrify all the people who are in Rio or who, like David Cameron, are avoiding it.
Hi, hi. I'd just like to ask the panel, since the Rio conference is on sustainable development and giving our attention to language, do we think that the term sustainable development still has life in it after 20 years? How do the panel think it's matured, and do they think that it can really bear the weight of the world's problems at the moment?
Thank you. Who wants to go first on answering that question?
First one to say is, like, I hear a lot that people say, like, yeah, we can't use sustainability no more because it's been taken over by the conservatives and or the social. I mean, you know, I think that's maybe a good thing that they you know, integrated ideas of sustainability in their programs. You know, that's not really related to your question, but I think it's that's something positive. You know. And we shouldn't be afraid of. I don't understand. Like, if you are a political movement, not a political party, but you know, climate act, you are a political movement with a political message. Then saying, yes, this political party, they stole our idea. Amazing. That's a good thing. You know, that they took your idea and integrated it in their program. So that, I mean, on the word, you know, the language used. But in effect, I have to agree that now sustainability is it's vague again. I mean, it's been used and overused. So for a lot of people, don't feel good with using the term anymore. I mean, the ecologists, you know, they say, like, and in Belgium there is this word, but I was thinking about the translation, but I haven't found it. So. It's about veerkracht. I don't know what it's called. Like a veer is a spring that you can press it, you know, and then it jumps back again. What's it called? Spring. A spring, yeah. It's the spring power, you know, and it's. I like the word because it illustrates that you can push it on a certain level, but or you could you could pull on it, but at a certain level you will never be able to pull it back again. And that's the whole idea also about sustainability. You can push a system or a person. That's what I like more about this word. It's more visible. It's you can if you pull the spring, you know, at one point everybody sees it. You can imagine it now. I'm doing it. I'm pulling it, and you imagine, okay, if we pull our economic system too much, it will be broken. You know. And also if we stress our people too much in the economic system that they're working in. It will be broken. So I think you have a point that maybe we should go for another term, and then try to get that in programs of all the other parties, and then 10 years later use another term. I don't know, but just to get the idea over. But sustainability now I don't know if maybe here in the room we know what it means, but for a lot of people it's quite vague, the term. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to comment on that.
So kind of, yeah. I think Bart's really right in that, like, it's hard to get that balance between having influenced, like, global discourse to the extent that it has become mainstream. We need this stuff to become mainstream. We can't hold on to it as our niche issue. The only reason that there was action on climate change in the government in the UK is because there was cross-party consensus on it. It wasn't a party political issue. If these become party political issues, the Green movement is seen as the left, as the socialists. Like, in an ideal world, we would still be able to get action, even though that was the case. But this affects all people. We need people of all political colours to adopt this agenda, and it will mean that they use that language. Like, it's not ours to hold on to, it's ours to share with the world. On sustainable development, I was talking to somebody recently, and they said, how can you have development that's not sustainable and it's still development? Because it's going to be a short-term solution. It's an oxymoron, and I completely agree. But I want to break down the word development as well. I think Harald mentioned this earlier. Look at the development pathway that we hold up as developed countries. It's ridiculous. Like, we have massive social injustice, inequity, lack of trust, communities that break down, and we're trying to propagate this model across the world. Until we've got that really fixed, I don't think we should talk about development as something that we've achieved. The other thing to kind of talk about is we always think in terms of economic development, and this is one of the things that Rio is desperately trying to address. It's no longer just saying it's enough to look at kind of GDP, fiscal growth. It's about bringing those three. Sustainable development, for me, is balancing environment, society, and the economy. And until we have that, that should be our development. Maybe we do need new words for it. I haven't got them at the moment, and I think we kind of have to maybe reclaim and give a little bit more credibility and integrity back to sustainable development. I think that's our job.
Cheers. I would agree with both Bart and Neva, and this sort of nebulous term, sustainability. What does it mean? But I think not having a better word, maybe spring. I'm not sure that that will catch on quite the way that sustainability has. I think we should probably continue to run with this for now. I think you see that I guess every major company these days has a sustainability unit. Whether or not they actually mean the same thing is a different question altogether. But I think it's important, and I just wanted to bring the discussion to that from my point of view, that because we don't really talk about the private sector enough, and capital that needs to come and flow from the private sector. Sustainability and doing something about sustainability and climate change mitigation and adaptation, all these things will require massive investment. And it is investment that we should make. But money isn't exactly forthcoming these days from OECD countries. They have a lot of problems, and we're spending hundreds of billions on saving the banks and protecting our economies in Europe and the United States and elsewhere. But we need money as well for climate change mitigation, adaptation, to make our energy systems more resilient, to invest in all sorts of things. And for that, we need the private sector. And we cannot get companies in the private sector on board if we use a language or if we use approaches that will always scare them off. Of course, you have to stand on principle as well. But there are ways to do it, and there are ways not to do it. And I think when you look at some of the examples around the world, how the public sector has taken the lead to leverage private sector investment, there are some really good cases where that is working really well, to the benefit not just of those countries, but of developing countries as well. You look at what Germany is doing with its development bank, the KfW. They have a program where Germany, using the KfW, using or drawing on the very good credit rating that Germany still enjoys, maybe not for much longer, but the AAA rating, they go to financial markets, and they loan or they get money drawing on that credit rating at very, very good conditions, maybe 1% or 1.5. Invest that money, use it as a risk buffer, if you will, to leverage private sector investment, to bring the private sector on board as a partner in projects in developing countries or in the OECD world itself, in Germany itself. And the experience is that for every euro that the public sector, that the German government through the KfW has invested, 10 euros of private money, private sector investment have flown. And that is a very, very good example. This is exactly what is happening, but is not replicated elsewhere. The Green Investment Bank, what this government is trying to do, it capitalized the bank with 3 billion, which isn't a lot of money to begin with. And it did not give the Green Investment Bank full borrowing power until 2015. That's up to a review by George Osborne, I would think, who is unlikely to give the Green Investment Bank full borrowing powers in 2015. So if you don't give the Green Investment Bank, in this case, the power to go to financial markets and get money, and then, if you will, through an arrangement where you have risk tranches and you underwrite certain investments with public sector money and you back up the private sector to some extent, then you're not going to leverage, you're not going to get that private money that we need. And I think we need to do a better job bringing companies on board as well.
Yeah, on the sir in the back, he also mentioned it's been mentioned a lot, and I just want to add to what Harald is saying. In a lot of discourses here is the corporations are bad. And that's what I learned today. Corporations are bad. But if you hear what Harald is saying, we need the private sector, we need the corporations to change, the way we produce, the way our economy works. And this narrative of always continuously saying that the corporations are bad, sorry, but we will not be able to change our economic system, or if we say we don't need companies anymore, without reaching out to the corporations. I heard in discourse saying that, or insinuating that we shouldn't even talk to the corporations. That is madness. Why not talk to Shell? Why not talk to the oil industry? They are the ones that are now polluting our world. You have to talk with them to explain what the problem is, and also that to tell them that, they know about, they know that their resources will be are finite. That they have to make strategies to in the how you say that the situation after the oil, when the oil is gone. They have to prepare for that. So they are partners. They are partners. I was on a congress of the EGP, the European Green Party, and there I was really inspired by Ida Auken, the Minister of Environment of Denmark, and she was saying, and it's quite bold for this audience maybe, that we should go to the companies and ask them to fund our campaigns, because the green movement is creating new economic sectors in which they will be able to make money, and which we will the people profit, the people will profit from, because they will create the new systems, the new products that will be environmentally friendly, that will be sustainable. It's with the companies that we will create our new green economy, not without.
Can I do you want to take it back, or can I?
Can I just take a couple of people from the floor and then come back?
Right.
Thank you. I have more a comment, but I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say about this. But just on the question of sustainability, I principally agree with you. I think it's really important that sustainability is going into the mainstream, and companies in particular are taking it over. I think the danger is that the term sustainability implies that we can continue doing what we are doing in a sustainable way and this will be fine. And that's actually not true, because we are already in a time of crisis and we are at a tipping point. And we actually need to think about radical solutions to things that are going on, challenges that we are facing. So sustainability, doing things in the same way that we've been doing them now, is not actually sustainable. That's the point I want to make. But I want to go back to what Harald was saying about how Rio basically is an example of how powers have shifted and how decision-making has shifted. And it is a really important forum, but there's also the need to look into alternative fora and alternative areas where things are being discussed and ideas are coming forward. And I think, for me, a very key issue in that process is understanding how to learn about these events and how to promote these events, and basically the feedback loops. So if you have a Rio conference, it's on BBC and everyone knows about it. So it's very clear what the feedback mechanism is. But if you have a gathering like this, what are the feedback loops? I mean, social media, tweeting is really important, Facebook in some ways. But there are other areas which are developing, and it's really it's empowering to think about those and to use them in this process. So I'd like to hear what your reflections on these are.
Right, okay. I mean, so far as sustainability is concerned, when Brundtland first coined this expression, Mrs. Brundtland, who was Prime Minister of Norway, yeah? And what she said was that your activities must not harm the lives of future generations. Okay, and I think you always have to define sustainability in that way, because if you don't, people are going to take it in all sorts of other ways, like, well, let's build a sustainable nuclear power station and it's going to be lasting for 50 years, so that will be sustainable, you know? And so that's what I feel about that. I'm worried when I hear about people talking about massive investment and private companies and so on. This is what's got us into trouble. Now, I agree we have to talk to the big companies, we have to talk to Shell and so on, but how exactly we negotiate with them and how we get to where we want to be, which is where we're sustainable, I'm not quite sure. Because the way that Shell and the big companies are going now is thoroughly unsustainable, and future generations are going to be very, very unhappy. I belong to a transition town organisation, and we're just trying to, live sustainably, provide for ourselves, not mess up at all. You understand what I'm talking about? Yeah? Just getting back to Rio. Yeah? Okay. Mr. Cameron isn't going to be there, and so we're just not represented.
It's not true.
And so what I would say is, there's Tuvalu. Tuvalu, is that how you pronounce the name of the country? There's Tuvalu there, and you're going to be there, Neva?
No.
You're not? Well, I would want to ask Tuvalu to represent us who are here, right? And I would want Tuvalu to say that we want a zero carbon Britain and a zero carbon Europe and a zero carbon world. And that would just be the right solution as far as our problems are concerned. And I just want to say, I went to Copenhagen. We went to Copenhagen because it seemed so important. And what happened at Copenhagen was an absolute disgrace. And, it's been said that the USA was not guilty at Copenhagen.
Not solely.
Well, okay, not solely. Well, all right, I'll go along with that. But the fact of the matter is that Obama, and we were hoping for great things from that chap, but Obama turned up at Copenhagen not willing to, not prepared to undertake any CO2 reduction. And so, therefore, what I feel is that so far as Rio is concerned, and Rio is going to be concerned a lot with the climate, and what Rio should do is to start to draw up an agreement without the USA. Just say to the USA, well, okay, if you don't feel that you can come in with us, then we'll negotiate a climate agreement without you. We'll do our best. It won't be perfect because it can't be perfect without you, but we'll get as near to perfection as we can do, and then if you want to come and join us later, then fair enough, we will welcome you. But I think that should be the answer, because at the moment the USA is just preventing us, and it may not just be the USA, but the USA is preventing us from coming to any climate agreement at all.
Okay, thank you. I think in the interest of sustainability of everybody here, we're going to need to sort of work towards winding up, and so I'd like to give the panel sort of last word to come back on that. Just a couple of points before that, on what's been said. I think sustainable development, I think one of the issues that came out of that...
I'm suspicious of the word development.
Well, out of the questionnaire that I was mentioning was a question of whether we should... Development is often defined in terms of gross domestic product, and one of the suggestions is that it should be redefined, and we should no longer use gross domestic product, and should, I think it's gross social product or something, but basically as a measure of development, not just how many dollars or how much has been generated, but as a measure of development actually look at longevity, child mortality rates, and various other measures. So that may actually, just changing the words may actually have an impact. And just coming back on the other point about the private sector, the private sector is not just made up of big corporations. You know, there is a very assumption that when we talk about the private sector, it's big corporations. Often the private sector in the terms of very small businesses are actually sustainable. When initiatives about new types of stoves or more efficient stoves are brought out in parts of the south, often the initial idea may come from an NGO, but if it's going to be successful, it's successful because small local businesses have taken it up and are able to actually generate enough out of it. Not massive. Yeah, so I think when we talk about private sector, we need to also distinguish between, there is a very big difference between shell, multinationals, and actual businesses, you know, private businesses in other parts of, you know, much smaller ones. So I will hand over to the panel to give their last words on what. So shall I, Neva?
Yeah, again, thank you everyone for joining. It's been really interesting to kind of learn more about what people think on this issue. It's good for me to get out of my bubble of just talking to the same people all the time. On the issue of like the definition of sustainability and that being used to kind of define models that actually, in fact, aren't sustainable, I think the idea is that as organisations adopt sustainability, they change their practices, that they don't continue. That for me is the idea. On the corporate engagement with the private sector, one of the suggestions on the table at Rio is for corporate sustainability reporting. And this has been put forward by a corporation, by Aviva Investors. And what they want is for all large and listed corporations to report on their sustainability in their annual reports. And if they don't, to explain why they're not. Because investors know that if they aren't considering sustainability in their long-term strategy, they're obviously not going to be able to deal with the risks and challenges and threats of the future. This is kind of way more progressive than anything has come out of government. And this is from a company. So I totally reject the idea that I'm really sorry, that all corporations are bad, even if they're multinational. Some of them are really, really progressive thinking, much more so than a lot of civil society. On terms of like outreach as well, I think it's really important that we actually communicate this to our friends and families, and that can often be quite a good way of starting social change. It's one that I use. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. What I wanted to say was, it's maybe how do you say that? Cursing in the church. That's an expression in Belgium. But I just want to end with that, you know, to create some commotion. Like for me, it might be very strange for you, but I've been in politics for some years, and now as president of the Young Greens, I don't talk about climate change that much. You know, it's probably cursing in church, this is. What I talk about much more is the resource depletion. And I do that because of two reasons. One is resource depletion is something that is should be top of the agenda. You know, it's how do we create an economy in which resources are finite. And two, I think resources are much more visible, clear to people than climate change. Climate change is a very vague concept. You know, everybody, I mean, for just people in the street, climate change, it maybe creates this kind of fear, you know, something will change, you know, they think about storms or something, you know, or the planet will heat up or cool down, but it's something very untouchable for people. And that's why I talk much more about the broader picture, it's changing the system, and in which we should take into account the finiteness of resources. So that's just, you know, to end, and then you all want to react, and you know, yeah. No, for the rest, I really want to thank the organizers of this conference to invite me to come here, because I found it really interesting to talk with other people, to have other visions, also to know that I have realized that England, you know, here, or London, is really activists, much more than in Brussels. I live in Brussels. It's, I mean, the pamphlet you see on the street, and it's a good thing. We are, compared to you, we are really lazy. So I want to invite you to keep on doing the work, and keep on spreading the word. Watch your language sometimes, but no, it's really inspiring to see how that you are trying to go in the streets, occupy the streets, and create a social movement. And what I was talking about before in another session, it's all about a change of culture as well. And therefore, you need to be in the streets, you need to communicate. We won't change our system overnight. It's a culture that needs to change. The way we behave is really, it's something that can't change overnight. So all the grassroots movements are very important to make sure that people start consuming differently, producing differently, and that we are, you know, we can end up in a real green economy that is sustainable, and yada yada yada. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Just two quick points. To second what Neva said on some of the business-initiated activities, I think you know, we have the ISO standard series, some of the voluntary activities that businesses, in this case, the global level, it's more the larger corporations, but also small and medium-sized businesses as SMEs have been engaging in. It's really important. Also, the public-private partnerships. I think we need to get to the point where businesses don't just think that, well, it makes business sense to, if they go sustainable, if you use that term, that they save money, but also where it becomes too big a reputational risk to not do anything about, you know, their carbon footprint or the way they use resources and their waste management practices. So reputationally, it's going to have a bad impact if they do not live up to certain standards, and that's where voluntary standards can play an important role. As bad as it sounds, voluntary. You know, why would any company feel that it's bound to any voluntary agreement? But with the ISO series, it actually works quite well, I have to say, even though it's not very ambitious. But what it does do, it does well. And just one final point, David Cameron may not be going, but we should, to Rio, we should remember that at Rio and at the conferences of the parties for the UNFCCC, it is usually an EU position and an EU negotiator that will lead for the European Union. It is not so much individual European member states that lead negotiations at Rio or Durban, Copenhagen, but it is an agreed position that the European Union shares, which is good. So it is not, while it may not be good from a, the sort of, it would get more attention if Prime Minister Cameron were there and if he actually pushed these issues personally. It doesn't mean that that the EU position will be any different because of his absence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you very much for everybody attending. We have recorded this session, so I will be giving that over to the organisers, and hopefully we'll be able to get it up on the website, so you can sort of relive the highlights of this session at a future date, hopefully. Okay, thank you very much, and good night. Thank you. Well, it's a good session. I really enjoyed that.
I do feel like there's a bit of a continuation of that. Like when Bart speaks and the guy with blonde hair spoke, and then you get the guys with grey hair and the woman with grey hair, and they just pass in the conversation. But they're broadcasting, they're not.
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
no dialogue.
I think there's that absence of the sort of social media awareness.